Thank you so much. And yes, prepare your questions. There will be Q&A for sure. So whichever provocative questions you want to ask, you'll have your chance. And hello and welcome to our panel on foreign interference and warfare in cyberspace. Very topical panel. My name is Pavlina Pavlova. I work on policies addressing international cybersecurity and transnational cybercrime, most recently at the United Nations Cybercrime Convention. And today, it's my great pleasure to be moderator for this wonderful panel. We've seen in the past years that hybrid threats and cyber-enabled foreign interference have moved from isolated incidents to a near constant drumbeat impacting national security and posture. So some of the questions we'll raise on this panel today are, who are the culprits? What are their tactics? How does that change the threat landscape? And importantly, whether we are adapting our digital defenses fast enough, efficiently enough, and in a coordinated manner. A warm welcome to our panelists. I'm so happy to have you to address all these big questions today. So first on the left, we have Marc-Antoine Brillant, CEO of VIGINUM, General Secretariat for Defense and National Security in France. Welcome. We have Baiba Kaškina, General Manager of the CERT.LV, so Computer Emergency Response Team in Latvia. Welcome, Baiba. And last but not least, Jamie Collier, Lead Advisor for Europe at Google Threat Intelligence Group. Welcome. And we'll start right away. Baiba, let's set the scene here with the threat landscape, but also your organizational response. What do you do at CERT? My first question would be, how has the cyber threat landscape evolved in Latvia, especially concerning attacks on critical infrastructure and those that are state-sponsored or state-affiliated, done by state-affiliated groups? And do you see increasing coordination, sophistication of actors, attribution to the state activity, especially with the context of Russia's war in Ukraine?
Hello, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to talk here. So first of all, a little bit explaining my role and organization. So CERT.LV is Latvian national and governmental CSERT team, but of course we do much more than just incidents. We are the technical authority of cybersecurity in Latvia. And our constituency is government, critical infrastructure, all the NIS2 sectors, and as a secondary also the whole country. So basically we see all Latvian cyberspace to some extent. Talking about how the situation has changed, I think we really experienced dramatical change in 2022 when the war in Ukraine started. Until that, yes, we did have incidents, we did have all kind of things that everyone else sees in the cyberspace. And then already a little bit before the war started, we experienced a dramatical increase in all kind of activity, in scanning, in trying to find vulnerabilities, in trying to get into systems, in trying to stole credentials, in DDoS activities, etc., etc. In some categories, the growth was 4 times as before, in some even 7 times larger. So in general, if you look at the graphs, it's this, and then there is this jump in 2022. What happened? Of course, first of all, really the activity increased. Second, we started to see and know more, because we also got a lot of help and support from the international community that started sharing more information with us to increase our visibility. So that was these 2 factors combined. What really increased is, first of all, the hacktivist activity, and second, also state-sponsored attacks. We have seen Russia's cyber operations in Latvian cyberspace since at least 2007. So almost for 20 years, probably even before that, but our institution established at that time, so we don't have reliable data before that time. Since then, we've seen those operations to some extent. They have become much more active, much more aggressive in the last years. And in 2022, our real challenge was, okay, what do we do now? How do we cope with this? And then international help came, and we have started threat hunting operations with the support of Canadian Armed Forces, and that's a separate story. If you want, we can get into details with that. But the threat hunting operations that we've been doing in our infrastructures have revealed approximately 20% of infrastructures have traces of foreign actors. 20%, 1 in 5. In some cases, actors have been there already for some time. In some cases, it's very recent. And our task in every single case is to find all the traces and to eradicate this infection, this intrusion, which hasn't been easy, honestly. So maybe I'll stop here and we'll see which threat we discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up on that. You mentioned 20% of critical infrastructure had these foreign traces of foreign activity. Do you know which sectors? Which are some of the most targeted, or what kind of organizations you see in the threat landscape?
Well, we've been mostly working with the government, with public institutions that are critical to state activities, as well as with sectors like energy, transport, also health. But I don't have exact numbers to say, okay, we had infections here and there. So I would say the whole spectrum is interested for the actors.
Thank you for that. Marc-Antoine, VIGINUM plays a critical role in detecting and countering foreign information manipulation in France. So can you tell us what have been the trends in recent campaigns targeting the country? How do you detect coordination, and especially around elections and public events, and what are some of the patterns or indicators that signal coordinated activity from foreign actors?
Thank you, Pavlina. Bonjour. Maybe I could start with some words about VIGINUM, what we are, what we do, and after I could give you some trends of the threats we observed. VIGINUM is a public agency, okay, dedicated to detect and analyze, we use the term of characterize, what we call foreign digital interference. We don't like to use words as propaganda, disinformation, or influence, because, you know, this kind of term could cleavate the debate. So we develop a specific term with foreign digital interference. Now, what is a foreign digital interference? It's an operation with the involvement of a foreign actor, state or non-state, with a specific aim is to spread with inauthentic means, artificial automated means, to spread a misleading content in order to target what we call fundamental interest of the nation, French interest. And the role of VIGINUM is mainly operational. We have to detect through specific patterns this kind of threat, foreign digital interference, to characterize it, and we have some specific tools for the response after. So it's the main role of VIGINUM, and we are linked to the SGDSN, as mentioned Pavlina. It's a specific organization in the public sector of defense, which has a large mission to coordinate the French response in the defense and national security field. So what we observe now about foreign digital interference, we observe three main trends. The first one, I could name it as dissemination. Historically, when we are discussing about manipulation of information, they are historically linked to election, only election. Now it's different. Now we observe more and more opportunistic actions. I mentioned some foreign actors are trying to exploit, instrumentalize any event in the real life, any news in the real life, in order to polarize opinion. It was not only linked to election. So the first one is dissemination. The second trend is more focused on the TTPs used, I mean more and more sophisticated. So the second trend is sophistication. Of course, generative AI, we observe a growing use of different public tools focused on AI. Why? Because it facilitates the generation of a realistic fake content. And not only deepfake, we have all in mind, you know, video with deepfake, but we observe the same trend for the text, image and pictures, and audio in a specific region in the world, mainly in Africa. So, growing use of AI. And we observed more and more the use of TTPs from the cybercrime. I mean, for example, you know typo squatting. You know typo squatting is when you impersonate a real domain name in order to create a fake with this kind of impersonation, okay? And the last trend we observed, I could call it intermediation. I mean, the foreign actors, state actors, they prefer to use proxies, providers, to develop, coordinate infrastructures or the large manipulation information campaign. Why? Because it's better to hide behind a private company coming from the web development, communication, business intelligence to organize infrastructure used for manipulation information or to generate content and the spreading of the content. And maybe as a small conclusion word, one of the main TTPs we observed during last year is the use of influencer in the campaign, okay? So I mean the use by foreign actors of influencer, nano, micro, macro influencer, in order to well target audience or specific audience in the public opinion in a debate. Not only during election, but for example during the Olympic Games, or any topics which could have a big power of polarization for the opinion. So the growing use of influencer.
Thank you. Yeah, that was very detailed responding.
A little bit anxious, I'm sorry.
Great work that VIGINUM is doing, and we definitely see with foreign interference that it used to be, as you mentioned, like piled around elections, and now it's like constant reinforcement of their tactics. So you never get to rest when you work on these topics and countering their influence. But private sector has been on the front lines of cyber defense, and we absolutely saw that, especially in the recent conflicts and in Ukraine, that without the private sector and cooperation between the public and private sector, there wouldn't be such effective cyber defense to the threats. So how do you see, Jamie, from Google's perspective of threat intelligence, how are the new threats? Do you see new threats? Do you see a repetition of the old ones, or it's actually very much changing landscape because of the emerging technologies?
Yeah, so I think we typically approach the threat landscape from a slightly different view. I think in the West, we often like to organize the threats into different buckets. We have a cybercrime bucket, a disinformation or interference bucket, a cyber espionage bucket. And through our visibility, we're looking at those adversaries that we're tracking, and we find that they don't care about those different buckets and those different organizing principles. And actually that there is a lot of overlap between those terms. I think the way that Russia has mobilized its cybercriminal community for political gain, that is well publicized. But we also see in this topic it really important to track the intersection of information operations or interference and network intrusions or typical cyber operations. So let me give you a couple of examples. One would be hack and leak. Right. If we think about spreading lies, disinformation, it's actually far more effective to steal information through a network intrusion and then distribute real stolen documents. So that, whether that is a cyber operation or an influence operation, it's really both. And we now see that sort of approach of blending these operations is baked into Russia's playbook. If you look at the tenets of information confrontation, the way that Russia conceptualizes cyberspace, they are both conducting disruptive operations and psychological operations. So, for example, in Ukraine, they are deploying wiper malware to render a victim's systems unusable, and then simultaneously leaking data from that victim, spreading news that that victim has been compromised. So really that operation is intended to create a destabilizing effect. And that's something we're really concerned about right now with all of the Russian sabotage operations that aren't just taking place in Ukraine, but more broadly across Europe. We saw actors like APT44 linked to the GRU, for instance, that has been very tightly focused on Ukraine, but now starting to target, say, European energy companies more broadly. So I think looking at those kind of intersections is really important. And then to the other part of your question, as organizations adopt digital transformation, as they move to cloud, as they adopt AI, we see threat actors follow them. there. So that's something we want to be really transparent about. We put out a lot of public research about how threats are targeting cloud. What we see now is that cloud targeting is hitting the mainstream. In a few years ago, it was maybe the Russia SVR, a few other groups that had cloud-specific capabilities. Now it's far more common, so obviously lots of benefits from a security perspective from moving to cloud, but we have to appreciate that threat actors are also exploring these areas. AI, we've also published about how threat actors are using Gemini, so want to be really transparent as an AI provider in how threat actors are exploring our platforms. What we see there is it's typically pretty modest productivity gains, and we see a lot of those safeguards kick in, but at the same time, really important that we keep a really careful eye on how threat actors are experimenting with this technology.
Thank you. And now we will, in our second round of questions, we will move to identifying solutions. We identify the problems, and now we are moving to solutions. And one thing that you, well, you mentioned so many very interesting things about the threat landscape, Jamie, but like one thing that is very important for the trends is also that the attack surface is expanding. So threat actors use different organizations as a vector to get to their target, and this is very problematic for increasing cyber resilience wholesomely. To have also smaller organizations protected, to have cyber poor organizations protected, is now more critical than ever for cyber defense. So, Baiba, how do you see it from the perspective of CERT in Latvia? How do you extend cybersecurity capacity to broader ecosystem?
Well, that's a difficult one, of course, but the general, I think, contribution from our side is really that we try to serve all our constituency, not asking to pay for that, because all our operations, everything that we are doing is covered by the state budget, by the Ministry of Defense budget, so it's also that I think is important. And then it's up to us, together with the intelligence agencies, to decide who needs support most, be it a hospital, be it a school, be it a university, or be it an energy company, depending on the situation, depending on the information that we have, how likely is the breach, how likely we have to look for foreign actors in that infrastructure. So I think that's one thing from the government side point of view, is really to support constituency without asking to pay for these services. Of course, there are always other services that companies can pay for. They can get quicker service from the commercial sector, etc., etc. But still, there has to be this baseline, like in a healthcare. Like we usually have in Europe, at least, that there is this basic level of healthcare that you can get no matter how rich or poor you are. And I think in the cyber ecosystem, we have to have the same approach, more or less.
So it's public good.
Yes, public good, exactly.
Thank you very much. I'm so sorry. Marc-Antoine, I think like balancing information and intervention against information operations, and at the same time people's freedoms in areas like freedom of speech or access to information, free access to information. It's very difficult to balance it, especially because on one hand you're expected to have rapid intervention, and on the other you're expected to make very quick judgment. And where does the balance stand? So how do you work with it in your when you're acting on these operations, and how do you balance these freedoms and the rapid action?
Now, as Barbara mentioned, I think this issue is a permanent issue. Finally, that we have always to be at the state of the art to fight the threat, but not coming like them through this fight. So it's a permanent issue. Your question is around, I think, what kind of strategy we could develop and tackle this threat on a long-term perspective. I think as a democracy, because France is a democracy, we need to found the strategy on values. And I think as a public agency, we have three main values: transparency, privacy, and, to be more offensive, I mean, we have to impose cost to the threat actor. The first, transparency. When it was decided to create VIGINUM in 2021, we have a kind of fear at that period that VIGINUM could be assessed by the public opinion as a ministry of truth or a censorship agency. So it was, at the beginning, decided to be transparent with the creation of VIGINUM. Through decrees, the service was created with one decree in July 2021. You could find this decree on the internet. We have a second decree. It's a legal framework which authorizes us to collect and analyze personal data on social media. You can't find it on internet. And if you seem to be a target of VIGINUM, for example, you could ask an information to us and we could answer to your questions. And we have an ethical committee in charge to follow the operational activity of the service, to make some recommendation, and they publish a public report each year to, expose what VIGINUM do with personal data. So transparency, I think it's the main and the most important thing. The second one, I mentioned privacy. We have a decree which organizes and authorizes us to collect personal data. We have some limitations in this decree. VIGINUM is not an intel service. We are not a police service. We don't make, a personal file to follow people. No. We collect what we call public data, like everybody could find on social media. We don't use intrusive technique to catch this data. And finally, we do the same thing as your mother. So we observed, we have some tools, okay, but we have the same access to the data as you, as your mother, finally. And the last one is to impose cost to the threat, because the role of VIGINUM is a defensive. And in France, like in the cyber side, in my field, the informational field, we strictly divide and separate the defensive side and the offensive side. VIGINUM is a part of the defensive side. As a defensive unit, we need and we have to impose cost to the operation, the threat actor. And we use a kind of toolbox with different elements. The first thing, and I think it's important for democracy, is to expose the threat. All the foreign actors want to stay in the shadow to develop their campaign. For us, we have to put lights on them and to show with transparency what they do and what are their objectives, is to divide the society finally. So the first, we have to expose the threat, expose the infrastructure. The second one is to alert the social platforms because they host the public debate on their platforms. So we have to discuss with the platforms, for example, to be more efficient for the moderation of the public debate or to suppress the fake account on social media. The third tool we could use is the sanctions. So we work with the EU institutions to put under sanctions the main organization behind the campaign. So transparency, privacy, impose cost, I think it's a good values when you want to develop a national strategy to fight foreign digital interference, I think. So the balance, as a democracy is not so easy, but with values, I think could be better.
Thank you, and I have a tricky follow-up question. You mentioned how important values are, and we also see that with after the elections and changing administrations, there is the divergence of values in when it comes to freedom of expression and what freedom of expression means for states and for the people. Do you see with many, and you hinted that it's so important to work with private platforms because they're operating the infrastructure and the systems, and you need to have this rapid response and the action on what you flag. Do you see the landscape anyhow changing for you? Because those companies are mostly headquartered in the US and operating from there, and the narrative on what is freedom of information has been changing in the past year or so. How did that influence your work, if it did?
The point you mentioned that it's maybe the discourse of J.D. Vance during the Munich conference, And what we observed since 2024, it's a kind of weaponization of some specific topic or narrative. Freedom of speech is one of them. Not only, but one of them. Weaponization of specific topic. And I think France as a state, and VIGINUM too, we have a role, you're right, to detect, analyze, expose the threat. But states, entre guillemets, not only. I think the main issue for the next years is to develop a very large kind of collaboration, cooperation, coordination between the state and the civil society, and specifically media. This informational threat, they want to create some distrust in the public debate, distrust against policies, institutions, elections too. And their main aim is to divide society on different audience they could catch, they could finally maybe manipulate in a long-term perspective. So state has a role, okay, but media, national education in France, we all have a part of the response to this kind of threat. And I think if we don't arrive to the conclusion of our roundtable, maybe the main word I could say that we need to work better together in order to have a part of the response to this kind of threat. Because it's a hybrid threat, they create ambiguity. It's not so easy to tackle with only state means, from my perspective.
Thank you. And Jamie, you have the uneasy role on this panel because you are the representative for the private sector here. And as we already discussed in the first round of questions, private sector has been, the role that it does in defense has been incredibly important and increasing day by day. And public-private cooperation is in the spotlight right now. So where do you see the role of such cooperation, and what are maybe some things, some examples that have worked well for Google to have more coordinated response?
Sure, so I'll address the private sector piece in a second. I did want to just pick up on your point, because I think that point around trust is really important when it comes to interference. And I think actually we've got to ask some pretty tough questions of how effective interference is, because I think it's often not the interference operation, but the perception of interference that is the most damaging thing. So let's say there is an interference operation just before the French election that is just bots speaking to bots, no one's actually reading that information. But it is then reported, it's discussed at length, and the French public perceive that there has been disinformation that could have altered the vote. So even if that operation was unsuccessful initially, the perception might be very different, and that might create a climate of distrust and uncertainty. And I think there are some really difficult questions within that on how we discuss this. Internally, we often think about, are we putting oxygen on the fire when we talk about disinformation operations? And I often hear, well, the solution is just more transparency. We need to be as public as we can all the time. And I think that's fine, but we need to appreciate that there is that tension with sensationalism. To give you one example, it was all over the news before the Olympics of this disinformation or interference campaign with a kind of talking about the Paris Olympics being unsafe. There was a kind of AI-generated Tom Cruise video. Tom Cruise was doing the narration. Obviously, it wasn't actually him. It was all over the media. Now, that campaign had been going on for about a year before that, and no one was talking about it. No one was consuming that insight. Then it becomes, then an organization goes public with that operation, then all of a sudden it's over the media. Everyone perceives that Russia is interfering, that it's successful, when actually the viewership of that is pretty poor, and no one's really consuming that. So we do need to be really careful there on how we kind of fuel these campaigns. On the role of the private sector, I think there's a lot that the private sector can do and can really step up. I'm really excited at Google. If I take, say, Russia, we've talked about it publicly that we're doing over 1,000 incident responses a year. We've been the lead incident response provider in Ukraine, alongside helping Ukrainian entities remediate. We're publishing threat intelligence on the threats that we see. Alongside that, obviously, kind of YouTube part of Google, we're tackling interference on YouTube. So we're actually able to conduct a lot of disruption, block certain kind of malicious URLs from Chrome, where we have 4 billion users there. We've got 1.5 billion Gmail users, so we can stop phishing emails from these actors land there. So actually having that kind of full spectrum of disruption and partnering with governments to really look at what does private sector disruption is really important. And then finally, I think on the kind of solution piece, I like talking about solutions, as I normally talk about the bad news. I think there is a bit of a paradox, because I think that those that are interested in cyber policy often lack the operational insights into what's going on the ground, the kind of incident response world, yet those with the operational insight have limited incentive and interest to engage with cyber policy. So we really need to blend those perspectives. We've had, for instance, people talk about information sharing being the thoughts and prayers of the cybersecurity industry. There's a lot of senior executives here today. We could all get in a room and say we're going to do information sharing and have a nice photo op, but does that actually impact things at an operational level really meaningfully? So it's really about making sure that there is that dialogue between cyber policy on the one hand and then the operational insights at the other. And I think we're starting to see much more dialogue, much more kind of into discussions between those different groups. But that's really important to build pragmatic solutions.
Thank you. And how do you, you mentioned the importance of dialogue and proper communication also when it comes to the threats. And when it comes to the dialogue, so the groups can understand each other, how do you increase that? Because trust, and we always hear it, information sharing is key to coordinate the response. We need to trust each other as an underlying value for that. So have you seen like any example of increasing the communication between the tech community on one side and the policymakers on the other that you could bring up as a model?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these fora are starting to blend those perspectives. Like, look at even this panel. We've got different perspectives. We've got people looking at it from a kind of CERT level, from a strategy level, etc. So I think it's really just having those dialogues where you are getting different people in the room and you're encouraging challenge, right? That we want operators to have cyber policy that's going to maybe challenging them in positive ways, but we also want operators to be able to challenge, does this cyber policy actually move the dial for me? So I think having that open environment, I think maybe a few years ago there was this kind of quite hostile relationship where maybe operators would say policymakers don't get it, and that's obviously not a conducive discussion. So really it's about, we certainly see this in the UK as they build out cybersecurity policy. They're talking to the intelligence agencies, they're talking to the operators there. So I'm really encouraged about where we're going. We just need to maintain that commitment.
Can I add on this?
Please.
Yes, I could just add to this that, I was speaking at the United Nations twice last year, and that's something I didn't even consider in my dreams like 10 years ago when I was working in the incident response. So the situation has dramatically changed, absolutely dramatically. And being on the side of technical authority on incident response, on what's happening in the networks, we've seen so dramatic increase in interest from all kind of forums, all kind of levels, to actually hear our opinion, to hear what's happening in Latvia and also internationally. And I mentioned United Nations just as one of the examples, but the same is happening also in many other forums. It's the first time for me here. I don't think you had very many CERT representatives on this stage, so thanks for that. And I think there is a lot of synergies that we can explore, and we can contribute with our data, with our sort of perspective on what's really happening to enhance, to improve decisions that are made at much higher levels.
Maybe just one word about info sharing. I think it's like in a couple, So one day somebody must do the first step. And France, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, VIGINUM and others, we try to structure in the EU a kind of info sharing network focusing on the info operations of foreign digital interference. And we have a hope in the next week that maybe we will have a joint exposure focusing on a specific campaign. I think it could be a first step to, materialize this kind of info sharing concretely. I think it's the next week.
Thank you. This was very positive, and I feel so encouraged now to ask some questions. We have some minutes for questions. So I would ask from the audience. Great. The microphone is coming. Please just introduce yourself and your affiliation, and we're looking forward to your question.
Thank you very much. Fred Géraud from the Google Cloud Public Policy team. And my question is to the two public sector representatives this morning. How does the collaboration, the work with these social platforms, because some are really global, some coming from China, some from the North America side of things, and how on a day-to-day work do you collaborate, or do you have any feedbacks about the way you work with private sector? Thank you.
Thank you. So collaboration with between the private and public sector on social platforms?
Now, to be honest, we have an asymmetric relationship with the platforms. So we have two groups. One of them is the good groups, or good guys. I would be a little bit fun to say that, of course. But in this group, you have some platforms which want to create trust with us. We have the link with their operational teams. They alert us, we alert them, okay? So it's well functioned. And we have the other group with the other platforms. Not the bad guys, but they are only reactive. They could do things, they don't do things. So they wait, some alerts from VIGINUM, for example, to moderate or suppress some fake account on social media. What is funny, is like in this group, you have the platforms which for the moment, they are under investigations of the EU commissions. It's a little bit funny.
Yes, I can just agree that the relationship is usually asymmetric. And in our case, luckily, content is not in our sort of area of responsibility. This comes from the law. This is not something I'm inventing now. Of course, it's very difficult to draw the line where really the cybersecurity ends and where the content or fake news or whatever you call it starts. So there are instances when, of course, we are involved, especially if it's a hybrid operation where you see multiple elements, but drawing this line is becoming more and more difficult. And we have numerous cases when we are asked to help to close down fake accounts that are spreading some kind of information that is harmful, etc., etc. There are other institutions in the country that have more of this function and that have more direct links with the platforms, but in general, there is really a lot of room to improve. That's for sure. That's what I can say.
Do you see, maybe a follow-up question on that, do you see also in the mix, because working on cybercrime, we often see that not only government agencies and then the platforms, but also NGOs sometimes can work as a good mediator, especially because they work closely with the victims, they have the understanding of the needs of the community, and they do act as a mediator maybe in the mix.
Absolutely, absolutely. We do have very good examples on this. Especially in the child safety area, there are very good organizations, and a lot of effort has been put to take down content as fast as possible. I think that's one of the good examples, but there are also other areas where it doesn't happen yet as fast as we would want to see that.
Thank you. And I know the question was for the public sector primarily, but Jamie, I think coming with comments on asymmetric relationships, I couldn't omit the response from the private sector.
Sure. I mean, I probably come more from this from a network. Our primary work is there, where I think we're clearly very closely aligned with many governments and providing that kind of agile extension when it comes to things like incident response, where maybe governments would struggle to scale that out on their own, especially in crisis areas. From my perspective, we've got a lot of good relationships with governments when it comes to interference as well. But I think you're certainly right. It's a mixed bag. Hopefully, Google's in the first category you mentioned. But I think there is a big spectrum of different approaches there. So, yeah.
Thank you. And are there any more questions from the audience? Oh, there is one.
Thank you, Stéphane Gagnon from University of Quebec. Fascinated, of course, by disinformation campaigns and how they are monitored by different groups. And the monitoring process has to, again, create buckets. One category that is quite crucial is the integrity of elected officials and attacking their character, attacking their political positions. And is there, because the debunking of fake news may be interesting when we talk about a minor issue in a region, but when it comes to the character of your president, of your ministers, the debunking of those news is urgent, of course. Now, fake news debunking still remains quite clunky from my perspective as an academic. And I wonder what VIGINUM and other agencies do to make fake news debunking more, I would say robust operation, as opposed to just an ad hoc operation by NGOs that are underfunded and poor folks trying to work hard to debunk news that they're not really well paid to do that.
Your question is very good, and of course debunking fake news, and especially when these fake news are targeting, politics, and one of them, the most important of them, it's a big challenge, because the bad effect could be to create a kind of, the Streisand effect. Then you want to debunk, and finally you give many visibility of a fake news, which maybe with no reaction will not have this kind of visibility. So with my partners from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Home Office, Defense, we question what kind of best response we have to develop against the fake news. I use the term of fake news. You know that I prefer foreign digital interference. Well, and we have two main questions. The Streisand effect could be mitigated or not, and the strike back. If we expose and be very aggressive to the response, what could be, the side effect of the main actor facing us. And I would say, I think we have to, it's a case-by-case approach we need to develop. Some fake news focusing on how President, Stephen Cook, for example, in a train to Kiev, for example, I think we need to debunk very quickly, because when this kind of content could be exploited, instrumentalized, gain many visibility on specific platforms. So we need to debunk very quickly. And for the other one, we need to be more prudent, to observe before, and maybe working with the platforms. And for example, when we observe inauthentic behavior, trying to push the visibility. And in our discussions with the platforms, we never alert on content, VIGINUM. We alert only focusing on inauthentic behavior on the platforms. Why? Because this kind of behavior is an infraction on the user rules of the platforms. So we have a kind of win-win approach to suppress this kind of inauthentic behavior on the platforms. So sometimes it's better to observe, wait, assess before alerting. And, I think the main objective of the foreign actors is to create effect in real life. They are to quit the virtual effect and produce effect in real life. And one of their tools is when the media, the traditional media, exploit this kind of fake news and show to the people an opinion. So we need to act before that and to moderate or suppress this kind of fake news before gaining visibility in the media. So it's an issue, a challenge.
I think the issue of pre-mediation is really important. One thing that we've had quite a lot of success at Google is a campaign called pre-bunking, where you kind of effectively prime a population. You may be ahead of an election that there is going to be this sort of thing going on, that they maybe shouldn't believe everything that they read. I believe we did that with University of Cambridge, so there was a lot of kind of rigor from an academic side that went into some of that. And I think there's more legs to explore where can we go with pre-bunking. I think I would also go back to the point I made about the oxygen, and there is that tension, right? I think there are some times where we absolutely want to fact check and refute. There are maybe other times where a very small proportion of people are talking about a lie, then a president, prime minister comes out and fact checks, then you get the headlines, and then people say, oh, what's this whole story about? I think actually one of the most interesting responses I saw was from the UK Foreign Office following the Skripal attempted assassination, where instead of trying to fact check all of these different claims Russia had made, they simply kind of threw them all up on the screen. Because Russia wasn't just saying that they didn't do it, they had all of these different theories. You know, it was the US, it was the UK, it was some private entity that tried to assassinate them. They weren't actually, there was no attempted assassination. There was probably about 20 different theories that different Russian outlets had put out. So rather than try and fact check each one of those, the Foreign Office just said, Russia said this, they've said this, they're actually contradicting themselves. And not getting into a game of fact checking. So I think there are some kind of interesting nuances there about how we do it, when we refute versus when we kind of just call out that sort of behavior.
Jenny, you mentioned something very important. You mentioned election and pre-bunking during election, you mentioned. For us, it's maybe the most critical period for us, because when we observed a foreign digital interference trying to denigrate or over-promote a candidate or a party during an election, if you expose it for debunking, for example, you could influence the public opinion during an election. So it's sensitive. So currently in France, we are discussing with some independent authorities and the media and other institutions to find the best way to fight this kind of threat during an election. And sometimes expose all the threats we detect are not maybe the right answer in order to, prevent the opinion being influenced by the media or other things. So it's not so easy. But you're right, pre-bumping is very important. But during the critical period of an election, we must be prudent, I think.
Thank you so much. I take these as our concluding remarks as we ran out of time. And thank you very much for the fantastic panel and rich discussion. Thank you to the audience. Thank you.